No. All right. So good evening once again, and thank you so much for joining us this evening for the third workshop as a part of our fall workshop series called Healing in Context at RedBird Therapy Center. My name is Anchal, and I am the South Asian Services Team Lead at RedBird. And we formally launched our South Asian Services team last month, and we hosted two workshops specifically relating to just expanding our knowledge and awareness about um, culturally responsive care when supporting folks from the South Asian diaspora. And if you missed the first two workshops, don't worry. It has been recorded and uploaded to our YouTube page at RedBird Therapy Center on YouTube. And I'll also share a link to that at the end of today's workshop. But today we have Aaron De Silva with us. He is a nutritionist, and he will be walking us through understanding how culture, shapes our dietary preferences and also impacts our mental health. And so I just want to do a really quick introduction to Aaron. Aaron and I, we met at through a networking platform, and there were a lot of synergies just based off of the kind of work that he does and the work that we do at RedBird. So Aaron is a nutritionist with a master's degree from the University of Guelph. Born in India and based in North America, he blends cultural insight with academic expertise to create impactful multi-ethnic health initiatives and practitioner training. He has extensive experience coaching clients with a variety of different presenting needs relating to their metabolic health, chronic conditions such as diabetes, hypothyroidism, and arthritis. And he specializes in designing practical, sustainable programs that are grounded in results. He is also a former competitive bodybuilder and soccer player and takes a holistic approach to his work that integrates both physical performance and mental resilience. Having personally navigated early mental health challenges, Aaron is super passionate about bridging cultural context with modern health practices to promote lasting well-being in immigrant and second-generation communities. So thank you so much once again for joining us, and over to you, Aaron. We're really excited to hear from you.
All right. Thank you so much, Anshul. So good evening, everyone. So my name is Aaron De Silva, and I'm a nutritionist, as Anshul has spoken about me a bit. My company is Fitness Pros Canada, and I'm based out of the GTA, but I serve clients across North America. And yeah, just a big thank you to Barbara and Anshul for having me over and presenting to you guys. So yeah, today we're going to present a unique and important topic, which is cultural diets and mental health in South Asian immigrants. But before we dive in, I think we should do a little bit of an introduction. And that means you're going to introduce yourselves to me. Are you guys practitioners? How many practitioners are here? All right. So we got a good mixture. So some practitioners. Is everyone else like a client or just willing to learn more about I guess South Asian diets and whatnot? Yeah. Okay. All right, perfect. Um, all right. So yeah, so it's for everyone here. It's for practitioners. I think it can has relevance to when you're treating your patients. It'll help you to understand a bit more about your clients and what they're going through. And for people who are just willing to learn more, it can also be good for you too to understand that, hey, like other people are going through this too, and how you can overcome some of these challenges. All right. So a little bit about myself. So as Anshul described, I am a nutritionist. I've been doing it for about 10 years. Um, I've been coaching clients since I think 2016, which was soon after I graduated from Guelph. And my focus has always been on culturally aligned nutrition planning because I found that there was a gap in in the market because no one was really serving those needs. Everything was one size fits all, and that approach I found in practice never really worked. Just give me a second. All right, so a little bit more about myself, just on a personal note, because I think if you want to get to know each other, it's helpful to understand where we come from. So I actually grew up in Brampton, Ontario. I've been living there for about 25 years. I live with my partner, Angela, who actually helped me create this cute presentation. I also have a dog named Rudy, who is my brother, my friend. Um, I have a few hobbies, and it helped shape the work I do today. I really enjoy camping in the outdoors. I've gone and camped in really crazy places like Grand Canyon last year, and that was fun. I do some natural bodybuilding, and when I have the time, like to play sports. But my approach to this has always been more of a sustainable, holistic approach. And that kind of formulated my program that I deliver today. I have a very holistic approach to nutrition and just to lifestyle in general. So I'm going to talk to you a more about my background and how I got into this business and how I formulated my programming. And it started from when I was very young. I'm actually an immigrant. I was born in a place called Mumbai, India, and it was actually called Bombay back in the day. And personally, I think that's a much cooler name, but I don't make the rules. And that was over 30 years ago, by the way. So I've spent about 3 decades here in Canada, which sounds like a lot, because it makes me feel very old. But I'm actually in my mid 30s, and I like to practice what I preach, which is why I look a little bit younger, I hope. Um, and so jumping into the cultural food context. So even though I grew up in Canada, and I'll add some personal element here and there, um, my parents, when they first came over, they had no experience living in the Western world. So they brought over their culture, their traditions, and that included food. So when I was living at home, our home, it always smelled like ginger, garlic, masalas. And honestly, that made me feel really like amazing. It smelled like home and I felt comfortable. But I remember early on when I first went to school that it was a different story. I felt quite uncomfortable sharing that with other people. In fact, I felt embarrassed when my parents would prepare lunch for me and I'd have to bring it to school. Um, like many of you who are South Asian, you might have grown up with this. But I faced a bit of discrimination in school. There were a lot of kids around the same age who would make comments about the smell. They'd make jokes about it behind my back. And eventually, I had to talk to my parents about it. I told them, hey, listen, I can't keep eating this food at school. People are making fun of me. So eventually what happened is they started giving me sandwiches. They started giving me Lunchables because I used to see Lunchables on Teletoon. And sometimes I convinced them to give me Dunkaroos. And please tell me everyone knows what Dunkaroos are. Yeah? Okay, perfect. No? Okay. It's okay. We can Google it afterwards, but I guarantee you'll love it if you ever try it. Um, yeah, so anyhow, this kind of shaped my view of food. I'll get into that in a second. So when my parents changed my food to slightly more westernized, the changes, they made me feel like I fit in a little bit more, right? I still had brown skin, but at least I was eating, the same food as everyone else. One thing though that I do give my parents credit for is that they did bend, but they didn't break, right? When it came to food, they still want us to eat healthy. So they would give us, Lunchables and stuff here and there, but they limited how much processed food I ate. And till today, I'm very happy about that because, grew up a healthy kid, right? And I can't say that about a lot of the kids that grow up today. Now, These experiences, I said a little bit before, they did shape my experience, or they did shape how I viewed food. Um, and that what that means is that at home, food meant something different to me than it meant to me at school. At home, food was more about connection. It helped me feel closer to my roots back in India. Made me feel closer to my family because it was sharing our culture. Whereas at school, it was more about fitting in and it's about convenience. Funny stories, I'm a very slow eater. Our lunch breaks were, I think, 30 minutes, and even that wasn't long enough. So I preferred eating quick meals. And yeah, of course, it was more about conformity and identity at school than anything else. So I'm sharing this story because my story, it's ultimately it's not unique. A lot of South Asian immigrants, they go through the same experience that I did. And it's a shame because, historically across all cultures, food it's deeply tied to our identity and it brings communities together and it's deeply tied to emotion. But what happens is after immigration, something interesting happens. It's that our mind starts to disconnect the meaning of food, and it instead becomes something that we feel we have to change in order to fit in to society. So, from a psychological perspective, this leads to an internal conflict between our traditional habits and between the pressures of a Western lifestyle. And most people actually don't realize this. And one of the side effects of this conflict is lowered mental well-being. Now, this mainly happens because our cultural traditions and attitudes, they usually clash with the Western pace of life. And as you know, the Western society has a much different pace of life compared to the rest of the world. I mean, nowadays it is changing, like it's becoming more, I guess we're all kind of assimilating into one uh, due to globalization, but things like limited time, more sedentary routines, and of course, completely different food sources. And yeah, the Western lifestyle, and this is funny because in research, they use the term Western diet, and it's it's true. The Western lifestyle, it's synonymous with processed foods, and that's what the Western diet is. It's highly processed foods. The long work hours, less movement, and what that does, it contributes to lower health, physical health, and of course, mental health too. So here's what's fascinating. So I did a bit of research, and what the research showed was for immigrants, when they stayed connected to their cultural foods, it actually started to improve mental well-being. Now, the downside to that is that the physical ailments still remained, meaning the chronic illnesses. And that's because the cultural foods, they become less balanced once we change environments. And what's even more interesting is that these same health issues, they're becoming even more prevalent in our originator countries, in the South Asian countries. And they didn't exist to the same degree as they do today. And as I said before, it's due to globalization and modernization. Everyone is starting to have the same lifestyle across the globe. So part of what I focus on in my programs and in my business is I help clients to establish a healthy relationship with their food. That means using cooking methods that are healthier, sourcing higher quality ingredients, understanding food in a different way, while still maintaining the cultural traditions and the foundations of each meal. I do introduce clients to new foods because they should expand their palate in a new country, and of course, new nutrients that they might not have grown up with. The education part is key too, because I help them to understand how food influences their physical health and how it also influences their mental health. And I find that when that connection clicks, something amazing happens. And people, they begin to see that, food is not something that needs to be restricted. It's not something that should be only viewed as fuel, but it's also something that can heal and can connect each other. And that's because cultural food is not something to be ashamed of or labeled as unhealthy. Like a lot of clients believe that South Asian food, it's unhealthy, right? And that it's causing their health problems. The idea is that the cultural foods, like they just need balance and context. And especially in a society where our lifestyles, they look very different than how they look back home. So tonight, what I want to do is explore how our cultural identity shapes our eating habits and how these habits they evolve after immigrating to North America. Then we're going to dive into how these changes impact our mental health, and especially within the pressures of Western living. So I want to see a show of hands for all the practitioners and even for everyone who's not a practitioner. How many of you have struggled with or had clients struggling with balancing traditional eating with trying to live healthier in North America? Okay, it's basically everyone. And that's very true. I think most people have that issue um, because there's so much information out there too nowadays, especially on the internet, all contradicting one another. There's no real like solid source. Mental health or eating the there's no real solid source of information for immigrants to understand what is healthy, what is not healthy, and how their habits contribute to it. And that's what I aim to do. So food is a culture. Food is part of culture. It's a cultural language, actually. It tells stories of where we came from. And an interesting story is that when I lived in India, I was one actually, I left. I had a certain diet and a certain way of living. When I returned to India for a visit, the lifestyle was much different. Like we had servants making food. And one of my fondest memories was just waking up in the morning and having one of our servants prepare like a roti with with ghee. And it stayed in my mind for so long and it made me feel very grounded. And that's an experience that I lost when I came to Canada. Another interesting thing about South Asian food is that it's not unhealthy. A lot of people have that belief, but it actually is when prepared properly, it has a lot of nutrients, right? It's predominantly plant-based. Not saying plant-based is healthier, but there are a lot of nutrients in plants. Although it does differ between different states. Like I'm from East India, so we eat a lot more meat. Like we eat a lot of chicken. We had chickens in our backyard in India, and we went fishing in the ocean. But if you go more north, it's a little bit different, right? They eat more plant-based vegetarian diets, like in the state of Punjab. Um, South Asians, some other habits that are unique is that like we typically explicitly eat home cooked food. Like there's usually a grandmother or a mom who's cooking for the entire family. And what's really unique about these families, and over the last 10 years of what I've noticed, is that every single family that I've spoken to, they have a very unique way of preparing their food. Like I haven't seen two families preparing this food the same way. And that's because a lot of times the food preparation methods, they're passed down over the generations. And I found that to be quite unique. Another thing about South Asians is that typically you won't find any of us eating alone. A lot of South Asian people would actually consider that to be abnormal, to eat alone. So overall, these diets, they create a natural structure around eating and around community, and it fosters, a stronger connection among families. Um, Also, when it comes to the food system, I'll note that in North America, we're a bit disconnected from that. In India, it's a little bit different. Like you have the milkman come into your door every morning. I know back in the 60s, probably had the same thing in North America, but in India, I think it's still prevalent till today. And then, yeah, if you want to get food, you just walk outside your door, go to the market, which is obviously different than it is here in North America. So once South Asians moved to North America, there's a massive change in food availability and obviously structure to daily life. So as I mentioned before, like the food system is different. Like in Canada, it's instead of having, fresh available food outside your doorstep or coming to your door, it's more oriented towards like fast food, which tends to be processed. And ultimately, it's a product of the market. It's more desirable for people because, making food from scratch, it takes time. People are working 9 to 5 plus commuting time. There's also the increased cost of living. Like in India, food's relatively cheap. Canada, it's much more expensive. Also, the distance plays a role. Like to go to the grocery store, you got to drive 10 minutes. You got to wander through like 20 different aisles trying to figure out where your food is. All in all, it takes you over an hour. In India, it's a little bit different. So ultimately, this does impact health because a lot of these processed foods, they're, just to give you a direct example, like they're much higher in sodium. And another thing that might interest you is that a lot of these foods, they're engineered to be more palatable, meaning more desirable, more tasty by artificially increasing the amount of sodium, which is addictive to the body, as well as fats and sugar, of course, which is highly addictive. And this is at the expense of the valuable nutrients, which is like fiber, and of course, other vitamins and minerals that you find in whole foods. So ultimately, it's a challenge to navigate through, um, especially the time part, like finding time to overlapping time with your family to eat together. And growing up, I felt this firsthand because when I was in grade school, we eat dinner every single day together. But as soon as we got to university and we started working, that slowly started to diminish. And eventually, it only came down to special events like birthdays and holidays where we would eat together. Some research I looked at actually was quite interesting, and it kind of points at the discrepancy between South Asian cultures and once they move to Westernized societies. And because of the difference in lifestyle, it's a massive difference. There are greater health problems as a result. And one thing I learned when I worked in public health was that the most vulnerable to these chronic illnesses like diabetes, heart disease, cancer, were those who had a wide variation in lifestyle differences. And the only thing that would help would be education or social support interventions. And that's supported by the literature. So as diets, they impact more than physical health. It actually greatly impacts mental health too, specifically mood, stress, and cognitive health. I know how many of you have felt hangry this week? Probably a bunch. Now, I wouldn't term that as a mental health issue. All right. It's not mental health, it's more just having to do with how you're feeling, right, when it comes to carbs, but it does actually influence mental health. And for example, like when people are highly stressed, they tend to get moody and that affects relationships. But that can also be influenced by food. Having processed foods does increase stress levels. And having loads of processed foods, it can impact cognitive health, how much focus you have throughout the day. And when my clients report back to me after just changing their diet for maybe a week, they report back greater levels of focus. They're feeling less reactive at home and they improve their performance at work, which is fantastic. I just wish my parents had done the same thing when I was growing up in terms of the reactivity. So if you're South Asian, you understand. Um, so yeah, so South Asian diets, they're typically nutrient dense, contrary to popular belief, right? They're rich in some compounds. You might know a few of these antioxidants. I'm sure everyone's heard of. They actually are rich in antioxidants. There's lots of turmeric, spices. They're loaded with antioxidants. Also lots of fiber. Like dals are high in fiber. And, Indians, we typically eat dal almost every day. And this is all actually associated in the literature with lower inflammation and as a result, improved mental health. Now, contrastingly, after immigrating to North America, some of the reliance on processed foods, it actually leads to greater amounts of inflammation due to the processed foods. And some specific processed foods would be like refined sugar. There's loads of sugar in our foods, especially in our kids' foods, which is unfortunate. It does cause some health issues. Also, excess refined carbohydrates. That's also a problem. And of course, extremely high levels of fat. Some level of fat is okay, but not extremely high. And all these things, they're associated with negative mental health outcomes, like much higher anxiety. That's a proven fact. Brain fog, and of course, fatigue, lower energy. Now, South Asians, as I said a few times now, they have some confusion about what they're eating. Like they're always asking, are my cultural foods to blame? Like not exactly like that, but they'll say, are my cultural foods to blame? Like, can I still keep eating this to maintain my health? And this confusion is actually, it's not good, especially for mental health, because they tend to abandon their traditional eating habits when in an attempt to get healthy. Whereas what the research shows is that fostering a strong connection to your cultural traditions and of course understanding traditional foods and how they can actually improve health, that actually improves mental health. And just a show of hands, like how many of you have felt guilty about eating food you enjoy, but you know isn't the healthiest? Okay. Yeah, two hands. Yeah, exactly. So just think about eating like all the food that you're eating, you enjoy it, but like you're also feeling guilty because it's not you believe it's not healthy. And that's what some South Asians go through. So it can clearly lead to higher amounts of stress and sometimes emotional eating disorders. So what the research shows is that in South Asian communities specifically, compromising on diet and including some traditional foods can actually lower depressive symptoms and, of course, increase life satisfaction because they do enjoy eating it. So ultimately, the problem was never South Asian foods. It was more so lifestyle and how the environment changed. And of course, lack of education, right? And having less time. Those are more of the factors to blame. So my goal with clients, which I've seen work through the last decade, it's to rebalance cultural food traditions rather than eliminate them, which is what I see often, even till today. So I allow clients to make their traditional foods with a focus on healthier cooking methods. Uh, the goal of healthier cooking methods is to preserve nutrients. Like in some dishes, I know there's a lot of boiling and that tends to leach nutrients. So some cooking techniques can help to improve their nutrition profile. I also educate them on balancing their diet with higher quality foods, higher quality ingredients, and of course, fresh produce, more protein. I think a lot of you might know about protein. And of course, reducing the processed foods. And what this does, and what I've seen, is that it reverses a lot of these chronic health issues like diabetes, right? It helps improve symptoms of like hypothyroidism, reduces recurrence of some serious diseases like heart disease and cancer. And that's all proven in the research. And of course, as a result of those lack of chronic illnesses or reduction in chronic illnesses, there's better mental health and, of course, increased quality of life. So now that we understand how South Asian diets evolve after immigrating to North America, the next question is how do we help these people? How do we help them create change that lasts forever? And I believe that this starts with awareness from practitioners. When I showed you the research earlier, there needs to be social support for immigrants so that they can understand and become educated on this topic. And it's very important, especially nowadays, because in the age of social media, I've had many clients who listen to social media influencers who sometimes give good advice, but everything has context, right? So it might not be the right advice for them. Um, I've also seen poor advice given by weight loss clinics. A lot of clients come to me from Dr. Bernstein, they come to me from Weight Watchers, and they promote unsustainable eating habits like eating 1,000 calories a day or less, and completely eliminating the cultural foods, eliminating carbohydrates, oils, and a lot of clients they fail to lose weight. Or even worse, a lot of them do lose a lot of weight, but then they regain even more afterwards because of the rebound effect of rapid weight loss. And ultimately, it's this unsustainable advice that's given that kind of gets in the way of progress. And yeah, hopefully, we can get more educated on this as practitioners so that, we can teach clients, the right approach. So instead of removing cultural foods, I think the best approach is to rebalance them. An example of this is portion control. So a lot of clients who eat a lot of roti and rice, they're definitely not tracking it. So that'll be the first step, right? So instead of eating 5 rotis with one meal, they can maybe have like two, right? Simple fixes like that. And then, of course, increasing the amount of nutrient-dense foods they have and help them to identify what they are. So some of the tools I like to employ, and many of you have probably used this before, is food tracking. Very simple. What gets tracked, what gets measured, you can improve. Also, weight tracking itself. Most people they don't even know their own body weight. They haven't checked in months, but that's an important thing to do every now and then, even just for general health, just to make sure that you're on top of your weight. It's a strong indicator of health. So with clients, what I do is I help educate them on their food choices, like what's contributing to their problems, such as weight gain, because many of them aren't aware. And even the food choices, like what's contributing to diabetes, for example, which is very prevalent in South Asian communities, because a lot of them aren't aware of the foods that are causing the rise in blood sugar. So I use a step-by-step process to eliminate the poor eating habits. And I also include a portion where I help them to increase awareness around what are processed foods, because many people don't know what processed foods are, believe it or not. And of course, the important part is to help replace them with something that's more satisfying and ideally culturally based. So some examples could be increasing fiber. And there's an example that I'll use of one client. So he's from South India, and they eat something called an idli in South India, which is like a rice cake. Now you can buy this in store, but it's not healthy. You rather make it. And there's ways to optimize these South Asian foods. For example, idlis, you can combine it with more dal, right? To give you more fiber. And the result is a more sustainable nutrition plan and it's more culturally aligned. So they're going to stay with it long term. And of course, from the mental health standpoint, it helps them stay aligned or connected to their cultural past, and the foods that they're brought up on. So these small habits, they add up over time, and they actually help strengthen cultural identity rather than get rid of it or repress it. And that's linked with reduced anxiety and depression. and which is linked to acculturation stress. Um, some of the research even shows that group cooking or shared meal programs for immigrants, they actually showed improved mental well-being because connection and community are a huge factor, as you know, if you're a psychologist. Uh, like community has a large influence on people's well-being and group dynamics and stuff. So when people reconnect to their roots through food, they don't just eat better, they feel grounded again. And that's what I experienced when I went to India, or I came back to India for vacation. I felt more grounded and much more present. And that's how people should be feeling all the time. So I'm a big believer in collaborative care, and that's one of the reasons why I decided to do this presentation. And thanks again to Anshul. I really believe in having culturally relevant advice from not just the mental health perspective, but also from the physical health standpoint, because it can create a more sustainable plan. And as I said in the beginning, the main problem I see in today's Western world is the clash between cultural expectations and Western advice. Ultimately, it leaves patients feeling lost. They don't really know what to think or believe. Um, and ultimately, the advice that they're hearing is not meant for them, right? For example, I'll use a personal example of this, right? I've worked with many South Asian clients, but one of the most important ones I've worked with is my dad. And he suffered from heart disease. His whole family, he's from a family of five. Four of his family members died, I think, at the age of 66 of heart disease. So he started on that path too. He had high cholesterol in his early 60s, diabetes, high blood pressure, and they believed that they were eating healthy, like my family did, and my dad did especially. But that was a wake-up call when he got the news from his doctor that, yeah, you have atherosclerosis, like you have plaque buildup in your arteries. If you keep going down this path, you're not going to live too long. Um, and he did follow some advice from his doctor, but it wasn't enough, right? And it wasn't helpful because it wasn't culturally relevant, right? It wasn't sustainable. So what I did for him is I helped him to change his diet, maintain his culturally relevant food, partially because I love the culturally relevant food too. But yeah, ultimately he stuck to the diet because it was something he enjoyed eating. People very rarely will give up the foods that they enjoy eating. Um, and I helped him to become aware of the processed foods he was having because that plays a big role too. And what happened was he's now 71, so he's outlived his family by 5 years and counting. So that's one success story, and there are plenty of others, just like my dad. So in summary, I use this three-step plan. All right, and I find that works well for South Asian patients. So you want to take this home. Um, so we start with prioritizing nutrition via cultural foods first. That's the first and foremost. And then we update their cooking methods and portion control. All right, so portion control is energy in, energy out. You want to make sure that they're at a healthy body weight. The cooking methods help to increase the nutrition in their food. And of course, keeping the cultural foods themselves help them to stay engaged with this process. Now, I do introduce Western foods because I do think it's important to expand your palate once you're in a new environment, and also just to integrate like a more balanced nutrition. Um, I also stress at least cooking at home, like once a week, just to preserve the cultural connection. Cooking with family is grounding, and of course, fosters community, and that tends to improve a family's well-being. And this ultimately sustains both mental and physical health long term without the cultural loss. So for the practitioners out there and also for anyone else, I prepared a few client education tools that you can take home. I'll send it out to everyone either tonight or tomorrow. And encourage everyone to use them, or at least, try and take a look and understand how that can fit into, your own lifestyle. Um, I've helped actually many practitioners along the way. And the idea is that to grow your own knowledge is to grow your client's knowledge. And that way, if you practice what you preach, I find that works well for educating your clients and then they'll listen to you more. Yeah, so thank you for participating in today's discussion. If today's talk resonated with you, we can stay connected. I'm happy to share any resources on nutrition, diet, lifestyle, or if you want to collaborate on, culturally aligned wellness programs, I'd love to stay in touch. I provide my contact details on the next slide. Give me a sec. And there's also a free guide, so you can scan that. Yeah. So thank you so much. So yeah, our culture has so much wisdom in it, honestly, and we just need to translate that into modern life. So thank you for letting me share this conversation with you. And I guess we'll open it up to questions.
Thanks so much, Aaron. That was really, really insightful. For folks in the audience, feel free to either unmute or you can drop your question in the chat and we'll take turns sort of getting through them. And I'll also stop recording in case folks have more personal questions or anything like that.